Hello there folks, Mediocre Painter here, and I'm doing YouTube videos to help you get into the wargame hobby because I made the mistakes so you don't have to. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you my painting guide on the Sepulchral Guard from the Shadespire Nightvault board game that Games Workshop produce. So these guys are skeletons, and there's one thing I'm quite good at is painting skeletons, having painted thousands in my time. It was pretty much a way I put myself through university. It certainly kept me in beer money. So let's talk about the assembly of these miniatures. So we've got a fair number in this particular warband. We have 3 petitioners. We have one that's basically rising from the grave, and basically we have 2 others with a sword and shield. The difference being one has a fur band across his shoulders and the other one kind of doesn't. We then have the Prince of Dust, who's carrying a mace. And then we've got the Harvester, who's carrying a jolly great big scythe, somewhat similar to the depictions of Death himself. And then we've got the Champion, who has a white blade, basically a 2-handed greatsword, and he is pretty much the most significant character that we have in this band, outside of the final guy, who is the Warden, the Sepulchral Warden. So these models are really cool, probably the best skeletons I think that Games Workshop have ever done. They are on the delicate side of things, so when you assemble them, do remember to be careful and follow my guide up here to make it a little easier on yourself. They do assemble quite nicely, they do push fit together well as long as you're careful and you don't break anything. I didn't need to use any green stuff on these guys in order to fill in gaps or anything like that, so they're one of the better lot in the Shadespire series in terms of assembly. They are probably, I say, a 4 out of 5 in terms of how good they are. I'd probably mark them down a little bit because they are a little on the delicate side, and they can be a little fiddly to push together because of that. So let's talk about the actual scheme that I used for this. So we'll start off with one of the petitioners here, and this is the petitioner with the sword and the shield, without the fur pauldron. So I started off by basing them. So normally with skeletons I would base in like a bone or a flesh tone colour, and then I really like my skulls to look like they've come out of the ground, so that the bone is kind of aged, sort of somewhat dirty and grimy sort of look to it, rather than like a bleached look because they've been in the sunshine where you go more white. I like mine to look a bit grimy. There is also a huge running theme with the Sepulchral Guard out there if you look at how people have painted them, in terms of having some sort of magic inside them and glowing eyes and things like that. But I'm trying to give you a guide here that you can follow as a beginner, and things like object source lighting and stuff like that is actually pretty tricky to do as a beginner. So everything I'm showing you here you can do as a beginner. It's simple stuff. Really, you just have to rely on thinning your paints and brush accuracy. So in terms of the base coat, I used a bone, a flesh colour. Any old flesh colour will do, really, to be perfectly honest. I think the one I used was flesh from Coat d'Arms. I used that as my base coat. I then had a mixed wash. So the mixed wash was basically 1 part black to 2 parts dark brown to 1 part water. And this basically gives it like a really sort of grungy, grimy look. and just whack that on the entire model basically in order to do this quickly and then go through each of the miniatures. I use the same technique across all the miniatures in this particular range. Then I did a dry brush highlight across the actual body back in the original base coat, which was a flesh. And then once that was done, I then picked out a few little details on the face in a little bit of white, typically the ridges around the top of the eye and the eye sockets and the nose and the teeth, just lightly. Picking those out with a near dry brush, just slightly wet, and just move it across to get the effect I was looking for. And once I did that, I then sort of picked out the actual metallics on the model. So in that case, on this particular model, it's the sword, the binding around the shield, and does he have a little bracer? No, he doesn't have. Oh yeah, he's. I did that in a bolt gun metal, and then you can see that he's got a little band around his arm. I decided to do that in a gold, and I decided to do the belt in a brown, so it looked like a leather, with the buckle also in a gold. Then I decided that the clothes, or what little rags he's actually got on him, I would do in a white, and then my original intention was then to do a wash on that white with a flesh wash from Games Workshop from way back when, which is sort of very, very similar to like a sepia, to get like a sort of yellowy brown sort of effect on it. But I didn't have that available at the time, so I ended up using a flesh wash from Formula P3, thinking that it was going to be kind of the same, as one flesh wash is very much like another. How wrong I was. And so I ended up with a sort of ready look to it. But actually, it came out really nicely, and I thought, well, it's a happy mistake, I'll stick with it. And then, so basically, I flesh washed the white, and then I highlighted back up with a white on the edges that were higher up. And in terms of the belt, I actually did the belt wash in the same tone as I did the actual model itself, so basically a mix of brown and black. In terms of the gold, I did the same thing. I basically just highlighted that in the brown and black wash. And then if we're looking at the sword itself, I wanted the sword to look kind of grimy and rusted, and so basically there I used that same mix again that I used on the actual model. I just thinned it down a bit more, so basically a mix of brown and black, and I just thinned it down a bit more, and I didn't do any picking or highlighting on the actual sword at all. And normally what you would do is you would perhaps, after that wash, you would highlight back up in the silver you originally used, and maybe just a little edge highlighting with a mithril silver to make it pop a little bit. But I didn't really want to do that here because I wanted these guys to look really grimy and grungy. So in terms of like the brown on the underside of the shield, that's just basically straightforward medium brown, like a Mornival brown or something like that. And just basically, again, a wash with a mix of a brown and a black. And then on the front of the shield, I decided not to do anything particularly fancy. I actually did it in a grey with a black wash, and then highlighted back up with a grey. And on the base on this guy, you can see that there's a bone on the base on this guy. So basically I used the same technique that I did with the actual main body of the skeleton, and did the same technique. And in terms of the actual base itself, I used basically a dark grey, and then I highlighted back up with a lighter grey, and then the tippy tops with a white, and I dry brushed that because that works just fine on these kinds of mixed bases, and that's basically my end result. And it ended up being really, really pleased with the result there. I was very happy with myself, and that was kind of my test model, and then basically I applied that to the other models in the range. So if we look at like the next petitioner along is the guy with the actual fur across the top of himself. And so really the only major difference I did here was I did do his shield in a gold with a sort of a mixed brown wash again. But the main difference on this model versus the first petitioner really is the actual fur across his shoulders, which I basically did in a yellow, like an ochre sort of yellow, like Avalon Sunset, and then I used like a brown, like a medium brown wash. The Formula P3 brown wash is really sort of brown. It looks like a Mournival brown almost. And I did that, and then I highlighted up with a dry brush with an orange, like a blazing orange on top of it. And I think that works kind of well, because it looks like old furs. It doesn't look like it's you know, just come off an animal. It looks like it's kind of somewhat worn out and such. I'm pretty pleased with the way that kind of turned out. I really like this model. It's very cool in terms of the way he's got only half a head. I think that is pretty cool. Same principles as before really. There's nothing particularly new in terms of what I did on this particular model. So if we move on to the next one, next petitioner, this guy is, I think, the coolest of all of the models in this particular warband. And this guy actually did something a bit unusual. So on the headstone, I wanted the headstone to look like a quartz headstone, a white quartz headstone. You see these in graveyards and such. And I decided I would do the actual skull inside there as an actual skull. But the headstone I actually did in a white, and then a very light wash with a grey sort of wash from Vallejo, I think. And then I did a silver wash. So I recently bought some paints from Instar, and one of the things I got from Instar was this silver wash, and it's like a thick silver solution that you use as a wash. Normally if you use like a wash with like a metallic paint, it doesn't really work because it doesn't settle properly consistently. But this thing actually works. And so I use that as a final wash on top of it, and it kind of gives it a really nice glittery effect, which you can't really see in photographs, unfortunately. But when you see it up close and you play it with the light, it's a really nice effect, and I'm really pleased with the way that quartz stone turned out. That's the unique thing on this particular model. So let's move on to the harvester. He's the guy with the big scythe. And again, there's nothing really new to tell here. I did him in exactly the same way as I did the other models. So again, I used a white with a flesh wash for what he's wearing, and basically the scythe is basically a brown with a, you know, a silver and a wash. So nothing any different. Let's move on to the champion. So this guy is actually probably the most complex miniature to paint in this warband. It's particularly tricky around the belts he's got. And I had to actually look at the Games Workshop website just to basically identify all the details that I should be painting here, because it's not totally clear when you've base coated it and the like what is exactly what. So I recommend that you do that. But again, I follow the same sorts of principles as before, except because this guy is a bit more of a character, I used a bit more gold. So I used gold on his braces, on his arms and on his legs. But again, I washed that with a brown mix of brown and black. Again, same thing here with the base. You can see there's a skeleton on the base, and I just followed the same principles that I did with him, only I probably picked out with a dry brush a little bit more white on that. So move on to the Prince of Dust. And the Prince of Dust, you know, there's a similar sort of complexity thing going on here with the belts going across him and things like that. Again, this is another one I had to go and have a look and see how it was actually put together on the GW website. And actually, to be honest, I think I might not have actually done the belt properly going across him, to be perfectly honest. But still, Again, follow the same principles, you know, browns for the belts. I did a gold sort of band across his forehead, gold buckle, gold on the shield. I used the same technique on the shield as I did on the other one, where I did a grey and then a black and then highlighted back up with the grey. So finally we get to the warden himself, and actually he's a little simpler actually to do versus the champ, because he's a little bit clearer to see, and again I followed the same kind of principles. Now, one of the things I did here with him was I used a brown wash on his armor plate on his centre, and made it a brass. And it was gold to make it look like it was sort of like a tarnished brass. I don't actually have a brass paint, so I use basically a gold to do that kind of thing. With the chainmail that you see here, I use the classic technique of basically black with a silver dry brush on top of it, and then I actually toned it back again with a black with a black wash, and then did a silver dry brush on top again, because it was just coming out a little bit too strong. It needed to be a bit more dull. This guy has got a pretty big cloak, and a lot of people kind of do it in a really sort of bright colour and things like that, but I felt like, to me, it needed to be in keeping with the rest of the guys in the warband. And so I stuck with that white and fleshwort combination, and I quite like it because it kind of looks somewhat like flayed flesh, and I really like that kind of look to him. That's pretty cool. In terms of his shield, I basically did a gold for the back, surrounded by a grey, and then did a black wash on the grey, and then basically a mix of a brown and a black for the actual gold itself. On the base, there's nothing special on the base here except for the hand. So you notice that there's a hand actually propping his foot up on the left hand side of the model as you look at him. So I tried to do that a little bit grimier because it was just coming out of the earth. So basically I used the same principles as I did before in terms of the wash, but I just added a bit more black to make it look a bit more grimy because it's just coming out of the soil. In terms of the fur on his pauldrons, I just follow the same principle I did with that petitioner. I basically did a Avalon Sunset base, and then I did a brown, and then basically a dry brush with an orange. So that's it. None of the techniques I'm using here to do this kind of thing is beyond a beginner. It's basically a simple case of base coats, followed by washes, followed by some dry brushing. More dry brushing than I would normally do actually on miniatures. I'm not a massive fan of dry brushing. If you want to know how to dry brush well, I have got a video up there. I've also got a painting series as well if you want to know what process I followed to do these guys, and that's also up there too. So there you go. It's a simple sort of guide in terms of how you go about painting these guys. I've kept it consistent and simple throughout these things, and I'm really proud of the final results. And because I was able to actually apply some batch techniques to painting these guys, it actually didn't take me all that long to actually paint them. They were certainly more than an hour a model, but they probably weren't any more than 2. Hope you liked this video, hope you found it useful. If you did, please like, subscribe. I will be doing more. I'll see you next time.